Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here of the Writ.ca, and welcome to this episode of the Writ Show. We're going to go over what the polls are showing as we get to the end of the second week of this election campaign. We haven't seen a huge amount of movement in the polls, but let's still get into the numbers. All right, these are the numbers from the poll tracker that I'm running for the CBC. You can find a link to it in the show description down below if you want to follow along. So let's take a look at where the numbers stand across the country. Right now, the Liberals are still leading. They have about 43.6% on average in the polls in our poll tracker, which takes into account all the polls that we're seeing throughout this campaign. The Conservatives are second with 37.7%. They've been stuck there really around that 37-38% since the writ dropped. The NDP, though, keeps dropping. They're down to 8.2% support in the polls nationwide. The Bloc Québécois is at 5.5% nationally. We'll get into those Quebec numbers in a little bit. The Greens are down to 2.3%, and the People's Party is at 2%. So we're still looking right now at a 6-point lead for the Liberals. That is a pretty big lead, especially when you take into account how their numbers break down regionally. In terms of what it would produce for seats, well, let's take a look at those numbers. So right now the projection is 200 seats for the Liberals. That is a big win. You only need 172 for a majority government, but the Liberals are well over that threshold. The Conservatives right now are at 120 seats in the projection. The Bloc Québécois is at 18, the NDP at 4, and the Greens at 1. Now, if we take a look at the likely ranges, and those likely ranges are meant to take into account small polling errors, regular polling errors, let's say, and errors in the model itself. It can't get every seat correct. You have a range of between 179 and 215 seats for the Liberals, well over majority territory. 109 to 134 seats for the Conservatives, 15 to 23 for the Bloc Québécois, 0 to 9 for the NDP, and 0 to 2 for the Greens. So pretty much any way you look at it right now, the Liberals are in majority territory. And that's why right now we give them a 90% chance of winning a majority, 9% chance of winning a minority government with where things stand today, and about a 1% chance that the Conservatives could win the most seats. The reason for that is pretty simple. The Liberals lost the popular vote by a point in each of the last two elections. Right now they are ahead in the polls by 6%. The polls need to be off by a lot for the Liberals to lose this election. Not only do they need to be wrong that the Liberals are leading, they need to be wrong that the Conservatives aren't leading. The Conservatives probably need to be ahead by 4 or 5 points just to have a chance to win the most seats. A 3 or 4 point error in the polls, you can imagine that. A 10-point error? Not very likely. So I think for the Conservative chances to actually win this election to increase, they'd have to increase their support by quite a bit. We'll take a look at where things stand regionally in British Columbia. 44% for the Liberals, 38% for the Conservatives, 12% for the NDP. So the Liberals are holding that small lead that they've opened up in British Columbia. In Alberta, the Conservatives have a 30-point lead, 58% to 28% for the Liberals. The NDP is at 8%. So Conservatives still likely to dominate that province, but there could be a few Liberal victories, particularly in Calgary and Edmonton. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the Conservatives have a lead of 16 points. 49% for the Conservatives, 33% for the Liberals, 13% for the NDP. That is the best numbers we've seen for the NDP anywhere. They're not good. The region is combined in the polls primarily just because the population in both Saskatchewan and Manitoba is too low to have a very big sample in a national poll. We do see a few polls that do break out the results from Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and what they indicate is that the Liberals are doing well in Manitoba, maybe tied with the Conservatives or ahead, but they're still well back in Saskatchewan. In Ontario, the Liberals have nearly a 10-point lead, 48% to 39% for the Conservatives, 8% for the NDP. So the Liberals are in a good position to win a lot of seats in the biggest province in the country. And over in Quebec, the Liberals are still leading by a big margin, nearly 20 points, 43% for them, 23.6% for the Bloc Québécois, 23% for the Conservatives, 5.5% for the NDP. The Bloc has actually been dropping here to the extent that the Conservatives could move ahead into second place in Quebec, ahead of the Bloc Québécois, but well behind the Liberals. And then in Atlantic Canada, 56% support for the Liberal Party, 32% for the Conservatives, and 8% for the NDP. So that is just a quick look at where the polls are. Just wanted to update the numbers for you and give you an indication of where things stand. Last week, I did ask for a few questions, as I do on each episode of The Writ Show, and I got lots once again, and I appreciate everybody sending their questions. I chose 2 that I'm going to try to answer today, so why don't we get to that? Got this question from Glenn Smith. Historically, how much do polls shift from the beginning of an election to the election date? Pretty key question when we're wondering if these polls are going to move, if the Liberals will open up a bigger lead, if the Conservatives will be able to overtake them, if the NDP is going to get back into this somehow. The answer to the question is they sometimes shift a lot, and sometimes they don't shift at all. And we don't actually have to go back far into history to find that out. We can look at just the last 4 election campaigns. So let's look at the trend lines in those 4 campaigns from the data compiled by that source we all love, Wikipedia. So this is the last election in 2021. You can see that there was a bit of back and forth. Liberals started with the lead, a couple points. The Conservatives moved ahead by a couple points. The NDP kept ticking around just under that 20% mark. There really wasn't much movement in the polls throughout that campaign. It started more or less neck and neck between the Conservatives and the Liberals, and it ended more or less neck and neck between the Conservatives and the Liberals. So this is a case where things didn't shift around that much. And you can look at the 2019 election, kind of the same. The Conservatives and the Liberals, neck and neck throughout that race, really wasn't much of a change in the polls in terms of the Liberal and Conservative support. The only thing that did change was that the NDP went from the low teens to the 15% to nearly 20%. They ended up underperforming their polls on election day, but they did save their campaign. They're on track to win just a handful of seats, and the Bloc Québécois did the same thing, was able to move into a decent position in Quebec. So there was a little movement for the smaller parties, but for the big parties, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives and Justin Trudeau's Liberals in 2019 was neck and neck the whole time. Now we get to when things did change. 2015, look at that. This was a campaign where the NDP started as the favorites. It then moved into a 3-way race, and then the Liberals moved into majority territory. Lots of movement in the polls over that campaign, but it was a trend line that was slowly building for the Liberals. It was a trend line that was slowly deteriorating for the NDP. But it did change the outcome dramatically. At the beginning, we were looking at an NDP minority government. By the end, we got a Liberal majority with the NDP in third. So this was an election where things did shift around quite a bit. You could say the same about the 2011 election, though it didn't really change the outcome. At the beginning of the campaign, the Conservatives had a big lead in the polls. We're probably going to win a majority government. Michael Ignatieff's Liberals then were overtaken by Jack Layton and the NDP. They got a huge surge of support in Quebec, and the NDP moved into that official opposition status, one of the most remarkable elections in recent history. But in the end, the Conservative vote held up pretty strongly throughout the campaign. They started with the lead that was going to give them a majority government. They ended with a majority government. So you can see that there are elections where things shift around quite a bit, and then there are some elections where they don't shift around quite a bit. We don't really know what election this is going to be just yet. But after 2 weeks, it looks more like it's one of those not shift around too much, because all the movement took place before the election call, not really since. We're seeing a little bit of movement here and there, but nothing too dramatic. And I also got this question from Abraham V. Jacob. Can you please discuss some of the ridings where the leaders are running? All right, let's go through the gamut. Mark Carney is running in Nepean. Nepean is in Ottawa. Nepean is a bit of a suburban riding. It has historically been pretty good for the Liberals, though it is a bit of a swing riding. When the Conservatives win an election, Nepean is the kind of seat that can swing over to them. Mark Carney is running to replace Chandra Ira, who is the Liberal MP, who was the incumbent. He was disqualified as a leadership contestant, and then he was removed as a candidate for the Liberal Party, and Carney is running in that riding. It just recently flipped from blue to red at the provincial level. It was a PC riding, voted for the Ontario Liberals just in February. So when you see this kind of movement in the polls, you kind of think that a riding that the Liberals held in the last election, they're going to keep holding. And especially with Carney as a leader, with the Liberals doing better in Ontario than last time, I suspect that Nepean will remain red this time. Also in Ottawa is Pierre Poilievre running in Carleton. This is a riding in the south of Ottawa. Really is a sprawling riding that takes into account farmland, small communities, and suburban areas closer to the city. It is a pretty safe Conservative riding. It got especially safer after the redistribution. With the kind of movement we've seen in the polls, maybe the Liberals might be able to close the gap, make it a little bit more competitive, but it is a pretty safe Conservative riding, and I suspect that Poilievre will be pretty safe there. Jagmeet Singh is running in Burnaby Central. He was before this in Burnaby South, but Burnaby South was redrawn, and now his riding is Burnaby Central. It has been NDP for a long time, but the margins in the last few elections haven't been huge for Jagmeet Singh. And with the big shifts we've seen in the polls, the NDP is going to have a lot of trouble holding this seat. I think the Liberals could actually win it. Maybe Jagmeet Singh bucks the trends. He's a leader. He could have a bit more of a local vote there, but the kind of movement we've seen, it's hard to believe that won't turn red. François Blanchette is running in Beloeil-Chambly, which is a riding to the southeast of Montreal. Kind of bedroom communities for people who might work in the Montreal area. Has been blocked since the Orange Wave. It went over to the New Democrats, but has since been blocked since then by pretty big margins. The bloc has fallen in Quebec, but I think that with Blanchette as a leader, he probably can hold it because Even with just the trend line, I don't think you would put this as a Liberal riding just yet, but the Bloc might have to fight a little bit harder to keep this than they would have thought. We got two leaders for the Greens who are running in this co-leadership model. So Elizabeth May running again in Saanich Gulf Islands on Vancouver Island. She has held that since 2011. Margins haven't been huge the last couple of times, especially the last election. Historically, it's actually been a Conservative riding when it wasn't Green. We've seen the Greens drop big time in the polls in BC. Will Elizabeth May's vote drop in her riding? That it's not clear to me just yet, but I think the Greens are going to have to fight for that one. They're especially going to have to fight for their other co-leader, Jonathan Pedneau, who is running in Outremont on the island of Montreal. Greens don't have a history there. They best performance, they got like 12% of the vote in 2019. It's going to be a tough mountain for him to climb there. This is a Liberal riding, usually a pretty safe one. And finally, Maxime Bernier and the PPC. He's running in his riding of Beauce in Quebec. This is south of Quebec City. His old riding when he was a Conservative MP, he was not that close to winning it in 2019. He got even further back in 2021. Polls don't look good for the PPC, especially in Quebec. I don't think he's going to win that. It's probably going to stay blue and Conservative. All right, well, that'll be it for this episode of The Writ Show. Short and sweet. Hope it was sweet enough. If you want to have your questions answered in the next episodes, you can leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get to 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how much time I have. And I really appreciate you watching and liking and subscribing to this channel. So you can check out thewrit.ca as well if you'd like to get a little bit more from me. You can get the daily newsletters, seat projections. I have them on thewrit.ca. So next up in your feed, our French language podcast, Les Chiffres. That will be up on Saturday, and the next episode of The Numbers will be up on Monday with me and Philippe, and then the next episode of The Writ Show on Tuesday. Till then, thanks for watching.